Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Mind Blown Zone podcast, episode 22. This is What Causes Disease, part 2. In this one, we are looking at the work of Dr. Ryke Geerd Hamer. He created what's known today as German healing knowledge, previously known as German new medicine. This is going to be fantastic. How you feeling about this, Brad?
I'm feeling overjoyed. It's going to be fun to do this one. I think after the last episode, I think people are probably itching to hear some of this information.
Well, I know you love Dr. Hamer, so tell us about what you're going to tell us about Dr. Hamer.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll start with the fact that the guy was over the top genius, just absolutely extraordinary genius. And let me say right off the top here that this isn't a full summary, GNM, GHK. I don't think you can do a full summary in an hour. I don't know if you could do it in 10 hours. But we're going to try to touch on some of the highlights and at least the initial ideas that hopefully will correlate to and help people connect back some of the ideas they heard in the previous podcast from some of the other doctors and researchers and so forth that had linked this idea of emotions and metaphysical causes to disease. So with Dr. Hamer, what's really interesting to say about Dr. Hamer, first of all, he was, of course, he was German, and he was still to this day, I think, is the youngest person to ever graduate from medical school in Germany. So he actually graduated med school when he was 20. Most people here in the United States do graduate when they're 26. So he was a real young guy. And what's interesting is that he went to his residency after he graduated med school. And he started, doing the rounds in the hospitals, and none of the patients could take him seriously because he was young looking for his age, so he looked like a boy. So nobody was doing, take him seriously. So he actually dropped out of that residency and went back and got a master's in theology. So took a couple of years to mature before he came back to do his residency. So a little interesting story about him. And anyway. He led a really interesting life. He was a very successful doctor, and he actually invented, I think, 20 some odd different surgical instruments. And I think one that's definitely still in use today. This is back in the 1970s, by the way. Actually, it might have been the 1960s, called the Hamer scalpel, which is still in use today. It's really, really sharp. But anyway, he was so successful with all his different inventions that he actually didn't need to earn money as a doctor anymore. In other words, he didn't need to earn the fees that he got for being a physician. So he was actually, his real desire was to just go help people, right? Which is what a lot of doctors want to do. They're not chasing the money. They just want to really help people. That was his desire. And so he ended up going to the, kind of the slums of Italy, believe it or not, and working for free. He was living off his patent money, right? For all his inventions. And he spent a number of years in Italy just helping, the poor there. He wasn't charging them anything. And that's where his children were growing up. And this story kind of begins with his son. Ironically enough, there's a Netflix special that just hit not even 2 weeks ago that his daughter, Birgit, put together with some other journalists. And it's about this event that happened. And the story goes that his daughter was, I guess she was Miss Germany, I think. And she was like a beauty queen. And she was getting hit on by some Italian guys, rich guys that had boats or whatever. And they invited her to go out boating one day. And she wasn't allowed to go. Her father wouldn't let her go unless she took her brother Dirk with her, a couple of years younger. He was 17 or 18 at the time. And so Dirk agreed to go. And they went off on this boating trip, this overnight boating trip. This is in Italy, in France area. And somehow or another, there was this exiled family that was exiled from Italy after Mussolini got, what happened to him. And it was the Savoy family. And they got exiled to this region of France is where they were living. And I got that's a tough exile, right? Beautiful beach down near Monaco. Anyway, this guy didn't like that these loud, obnoxious Italians were in his area making racket. And he apparently went out on this boat and a dinghy and tried to scare these kids. And he fired shotgun a couple times, or a rifle. I'm not sure which. And anyway, one of the bullets from the rifle hit. Geerd Hamer was actually sleeping while this was happening, and one of the bullets went through the boat and went into him, and obviously caused big problems, and he had to be rushed to an emergency room. Yada yada yada. Anyway, this is Dr. Hamer's son. I think he's 17 or 18 at the time. So the son would live. Geerd would live for about a month and a half, and basically comatose in the hospital, and then he died in Dr. Hamer's arms. And of course, the reason I tell this story is it's so important to the story is that Dr. Hamer and his wife were obviously devastated. And a few months later, Dr. Hamer was diagnosed with testicular cancer. And shortly thereafter, his wife was actually diagnosed with ovarian cancer. So Dr. Hamer was, I think, 38 or 39 at the time, and was perfectly healthy his whole life, never had any problems. And he immediately thought that that the death of his son and his testicular cancer were related, right? There was definitely correlation there. And same thing with his wife. And after, he went through the standard treatment, but I believe he got chemotherapy, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously he survived, but he decided that he needed to go back to Germany and get rehired as a doctor because he wanted to study and see if he could figure out what this correlation was. So he actually goes back to Germany, gets hired at a university hospital, which does oncology, and he starts calling the patients, all the old testicular cancer patients, and asking them if something similar had happened in their life prior to their testicular cancer. And I don't know what the number was, a couple hundred people he talked to, and his hit rate was 100%. So what he found was all of these people had what he would later describe as a profound loss conflict in their life. So obviously the loss of a child or a parent or a family member that deeply affected them. And this is when he began to make sense of things and draw the conclusions that he drew. And the same is true for ovarian cancer. It was the reproductive organ, as he would later describe, was that the reason that the tumor was growing on his testicle was to actually produce more testosterone for him so that he could have another child, replace the child that he lost. And the same for the wife with the ovaries. And not only did it help with that, but also the more testosterone made him more masculine, more attractive, more manly to help him attract a mate so that he could have another child. Make sense?
Makes sense to me.
So that's how Dr. Hamer got his start. And then he would go on to link all the different types of cancers, different types of diseases. And he would end up basically going and doing the whole thing. But we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. But I think if people don't get anything else out of this discussion, I think what's important to note is that, if you look at who I spoke of in the previous podcast, there's always this sense of punishment, or this was a karmic rebound for your transgressions, right? Whether it was, a sin or evil, these bad thoughts you're having, these mean thoughts, these wrong thoughts. This is your punishment for having those thoughts. That's the idea that's, pretty well proliferated through all of these other people that we're talking, right? They certainly, it seems like, well, if you have these bad thoughts, then these bad things are going to happen to your body. But Dr. Hamer really, his ideas are revolutionary. And I want to make this really clear, this point clear, is that it actually, the thing we call the disease isn't, a karma or a punishment or a sin, like you did this wrong thing. What he's actually showing is that the psyche, the subconscious mind, is actually reacting to this conflict we have in life, and it's trying to help you get through it, doing its best to translate what are typically figurative thoughts. Sometimes they're literal, but they can also be figurative, and we'll talk about a few of those as we keep moving on here. But does that make sense, that it's not the disease? Disease isn't an evil, sinful retribution, but it's actually an attempt to make your body work better for a brief period of time. That makes sense, Matt?
Right. I mean, under the stuff that we covered last time, if you got testicular cancer, that would have been because you're having some sinful thoughts, like you're a chronic self-pleasurer or something like that. Now you're going to get testicular cancer as a punishment. for that. But
Right, right. You
under
masturbated
this
too many
idea,
times as a
it's
boy. Right,
under this
right,
idea, like your psyche or the Christ consciousness, as Mary Baker Eddy would put it, is actually looking out for you and doing something to the body to help in some way, let's say.
right, right, right. That's the idea. So what we make the distinction now, this is what Dr. Hamer discovered, is that it's not emotions. And I hear a lot of people who know about GNM, GHK will say it could be emotional causes. It's not emotions. And it's really important to make this. He called it a special biological program, or an SBS. I know those letters don't match up, but that's the German equivalent. And it's triggered by a difficult life situation. So he would say that it's a biological adaptation or response to something that's happened to you in your life that you can't easily quickly resolve. That's
Mhm.
the idea, right? So I'm gonna get into real detail here because I've explained this to a couple hundred people now, and there's a few sticking points that people can't easily get past, and I'll hopefully get them out in this podcast.
Okay,
So
let's do
again,
it.
it's not your everyday emotions, right? So you may be walking along the bridge and a car may swerve too close to you, and for 5 seconds you're scared. Oh my God, that car almost ran me over. That really scared me. That's not
Mhm.
that's not this. The conflict is resolved, right? The car almost hit you. It went on. You're okay now, so you get back to living your life, right? That's not like a fearful thing or a quick judgment. Oh yeah, that guy I hate that guy over there. He's annoying me, right? That doesn't give you a disease, right? It's that you're over it, right? You get away from the annoying guy and you're no longer bothered by it. So it isn't these emotions or even an emotion where you just sit around and feel like things aren't going great for you or anything. He's saying that this is not what triggers the disease, not your everyday emotions. He says that it's this adaptive survival response when you get struck by something you weren't expecting. So it has to come out of nowhere, not expecting something. So it causes a shock to you. So yeah, I think I already got that part there. So Dr. Hamer also said, by the way, I want to make this point really, really clear that Dr. Hamer said 80% of all the diseases that we know of, when noticed, are already in the healing phase. So Dr. Hamer's got this two-phase, the second biological law. He's got two phases of disease. He's got this conflict active phase, but this is the period where you are unable to come to grips with or resolve a difficult life situation. So that's the part where most of the time there is no symptoms of disease. And that's when the psyche is making an adaptation to some tissue, bone, or organ in your body. And when you resolve your conflict, you find a way to forgive or forget, or you find a solution, whatever it is. When the moment you resolve it, then your psyche reverses those changes it was making that whole period of time that you were conflict active. So there's the conflict active phase, and then there's the healing phase. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I know how many times you've explained it to me, and it makes sense at this point.
Mhm.
Maybe I can just put forward one of the ones that helped me get it the best, right? I think it's probably when you talked about the changes to the lungs, right? So if you're going into some if you have some life situation which causes you to freeze, right, and suppress your breathing because you don't want to be noticed or something like that, like a predator, that predator thing, where you like they need to
Okay.
freeze and not be seen, or even if you're like in a just a household domestic situation and you need to like creep around and don't make a sound and don't breathe and stuff like that. Well, your body still needs to get the same amount of air. So it now you're experiencing a conflict and your body makes this biological change by widening the airways in your lungs, which are called the bronchi. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, the bronchi connect to your lungs. Yeah, they're prior to, right?
Right. So it's going to make physical changes to your lungs to help your body still operate even though you're breathing more shallowly. Right. So
Right.
this
I think
is this is
let me
called the conflict active changes. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, let me be clear here too. It's that response is unconscious, right? So you're not thinking, I better not breathe as heavily, but that's
Right. It's
like the
unconscious.
primitive reaction when there's fear flowing through you, scare, a fright,
Right.
a worry, a concern, is to breathe. The primitive thing is you're under attack. There's a predator nearby, and so the natural unconscious thing to do is breathe more shallowly, right?
Radio.
Right. So keep going. Right. So now you're not
So
breathing in
that's
as
your
much
conflict
oxygen.
active phase, right?
Right.
And then you've got
Right.
the healing phase, which is okay, the conflict is over. You don't need to do that anymore. Right. So the body is then, oh, okay, let's go in and destroy all those changes that we made. So there's all the inflammation and destruction and chaos and tissue dying and stuff like that. There's all these observable symptoms. And then you know, there's probably bacteria and you feel sick and you go to the doctor and you're like, oh, all these terrible phlegm and stuff in my lungs. So that's what you're talking about. Why when people notice the problem, they're in the healing phase. They go to the doctor with the symptoms. And
Right.
then the doctor's like, well, we gotta fix that. Take some
Right.
antibacteria kind of thing, right? But what Dr.
Yeah.
Harmer is suggesting is that is the healing symptoms.
Right. The 80% of the time. That's right. So that's exactly right. And yeah, in your example, your psyche widens your bronchial tubes when you're in that fear state. So you can, even though you're not breathing as deeply, more oxygen is getting through the wider bronchial tubes.
Mm-hmm.
That's in that particular tissue type. That's what's happening. So yeah, when basically meaning it's destroying some tissue during the conflict active phase, but there's no pain. It's just removing it, widening things. So the pain is when it rebuilds it. Right? That's when the symptoms, the cough and the wheezing and the sore throat and all the rest. So yeah, that's exactly right. So I wanted to make this point doubly clear in that how many different hundreds or thousands of therapies, treatments, and remedies for all manner of diseases have you seen in your life that they all quote seem to work, right? You can find there are a dime a dozen to find this person took this herb or did this treatment or took this tincture or drank this formula or changed their diet. And so 80% of the time, they're already, if they would have done nothing, they would have gotten the same result. Right? Because none of those things heal you. There's no thing, just as we've talked about in the first podcast, there's no thing that heals you. There's no thing that kills the cancer cell or the bacteria. You don't want to kill those things, right? Those things are there. Those things were there to assist you during a difficult period of time.
Right.
So,
for example, like garlic and ginger. People are like, oh, you're having symptoms. Take garlic and ginger. But people notice. They're like, oh, yeah, whenever I feel this way, I'll take garlic and ginger. And then next thing I know, it's better. It's like, yeah, that's because you psychologically went into the healing phase and you felt like you're healing. And then you're like, yeah, I'm ready to heal. I'm ready to heal. You know what? I'm going to get my healing stuff. You don't know that you're ready to heal, but you're like, you get this feeling like it's healing time. Then you go and do your ginger and garlic routine. And then you're healed and you think that the garlic and the ginger healed it, but you were just healing already.
Body was doing it. Now, in fairness, right? There's much to be said about the placebo and the nocebo effect, right? Those can be very powerful. Think, right? If I don't get my ginger and garlic, then I'm not going to heal. So that may cause a new conflict.
Right.
I'm going to have a new problem. So there's a lot to that. And there's also something, I mean, there are things that can soothe your symptoms, right? There are, foods you can eat and drinks you can have, right? Some warm tea might help with a feeling, a sore throat or something, right? Whatever the case may be. A certain, chicken noodle soup helps when you've got a cold, those sorts of things. There's nothing wrong with doing those. They're not healing you, right? But they may help soothe the symptoms somewhat. So just to make those points clear. But yeah, and we'll do a podcast someday on this as well, but if you really, really believe the only way you can heal is with ginger and garlic, then, and you can't get your hands on any, that can cause a whole list sort of problems, right? Whole different list of things that can possibly go sideways. It's a new conflict for you is what it is. Oh my God, can't get ginger and garlic. Now what's going to happen? Oh, it's going to be terrible. Oh my gosh, I'm not going to heal, right? So you can see how these ideas can take you sideways. Anyway, so that's the 80% thing. And just to be clear, right, there's a lot, we're not going to argue with people that they're 100% sure that, CBD oil cured this, or, apricot seeds cured that, or, this, a low acidic diet cured this, right? What, I'm not going to argue. There's nothing to argue about, right? Those things, according to Dr. Hamer, aren't the cure. And a lot of other people we talked about in the previous podcast, those things, it just so happened that the person, in conjunction with their whatever modality or healing therapy they were using, they had also resolved their conflict at that period of time.
Right.
And that's
And
likely why they saw symptoms.
I think the only thing to say about all those things that people say, oh, but this thing heals, it's like for every single material thing that you say heals, there are people who have healed without it, and there are people who did try to use it and it didn't heal. So
Right.
there is no direct causation from any of the things people are putting forward.
That's right. Good point. Right. So Dr. Hamer is very clear, and he said all diseases are monocausal in nature. Monocausal, one cause.
Right.
There aren't multiple causes. Right. And we heard, I mentioned this in the previous one, and we hear this from just about every other modality out there, this notion that there are multifactorial causes to your disease. Right? Can't pin it down, but it's a little bit of your family history, and it's your diet, and it's the 5G, and it's the cell towers, and your lifestyle and some of your habits, and those all contributed to your disease today, Matt. Boy, where does that leave you, right?
Hopeless.
Right where they want you. Very hopeless. Okay, so we're going to get into this, and this, I've used this word, I shouldn't have used it earlier, but I said it, conflict. But what Dr. Hamer said, the disease triggering event was this, the German to English is perfectly translated as conflict shock. But now how people in English hear that term, very different from what he's implying. And like I said, I've mentioned this to 100 or more people at this point. And almost the immediate idea is that it's this really traumatic, shocking, horrible event. And we've all had some of those in our life. Like, right. It's like, it just freezes you. And that certainly is a conflict shock, but it's much covers much more range than just that one horrific moment that we've had, for example. The conflict. So, and it also, on the flip side of that, conflict does not imply kind of routine, common, everyday disputes, disagreements, arguments that we all have with our spouse and our children, coworkers, parents, friends, neighbors, strangers, etc. That is not a conflict shock. It's actually those types of conflicts are something that we expect. We're not shocked by them, right? It isn't a shock when you have an argument with a loved one. So none of those things fall into this category of conflict shock. In other words, we're not surprised by it. What he means by conflict means a situation that can't be immediately resolved by you. You can't solve it. You can't get over it quickly. Usually with an argument with somebody, you get over it. We had an argument, he disagrees, and I say this, or life goes on. So it could be something that angers you. It could be a failure for you to perform a task that up to your standards. So maybe, like a physical task, you're getting older and you're not as good at it as someone. Could be a separation from a loved one, right? It could be a worry or concern about something that's going to happen in the future, right? In other words, there's nothing you can do about it. Well, my loved one moved away and now we're separated, and nothing I can do about it. So it's just if this shocked you, right, that your loved one moved away, then you now have a conflict shock. Is that making a little bit of sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's like in any way, if you're able to objectively say, okay, my life, my life value, my potential has just gone down because of this thing. So now things aren't as good for me anymore. Like, I think that's a conflict.
Yep, that's right. If you're complaining about the way things are, you've got a conflict.
Yeah.
Simple as that. And a lot of people are doing that. So this term shock, right? Again, it doesn't imply abject terror and highly traumatic, horrific circumstances. I mean, it could be that, right? But the shock, what Dr. Hamer was really trying to say is it's unexpected. It's a surprise to you. You're not ready for it. You don't see it coming. And it could be an unexpected diagnosis. It could be bad news you get about a loved one or a friend. It could be the loss of a loved one or job or money or a house or a career or a car, right? It's on and on. It's just you weren't expecting it. Wasn't expecting to have my car stolen or whatever. Right. So these are the types of things that he's talking about. You're not expecting it, and it's something you can't resolve. Right? Somebody stole your bike from you yesterday. It's a conflict shock. Right? If you feel right, like this is something that's really messed you up, you can dwell on it and be angry and hate the person and on and on. And this is the kind of thing that leads to disease.
Right.
So my translation.
You can see how,
go ahead.
If I can just add something in, you can see how the same event can either, create a conflict by it being a shock or not. Right. Like you can have your bike stolen the first time and then you can have a big conflict about it. Right. But maybe you never get your bike back, but you come to terms with that and you take on this worldview that like, sometimes you have things and then they're taken from you. And life goes on and everything's fine. So the next time you get your bike stolen, you're like, huh, look at that. Someone stole my bike. So the two ingredients are the event itself and how you react to it.
Your reaction.
How you're able to react to it.
Right. That's right. And remember, your psyche is trying to help you when you have the negative bad reaction. Right? It's actually when the conflict shock happens, it's a couple of things happen to you. Is that for starters, your blood moves away from your extremity. So you get cold hands and feet. It's one of the typical symptoms of someone who's conflict active. And it's all been pulled back to the center of your body to try to help you solve it. Your mind starts racing. In other words, you can't focus on other things. You can't do other things, right? You're just constantly thinking about how do I solve this problem? I gotta fix this. You lose an appetite. So you have a poor appetite again, because your psyche's trying to help you figure out how to get over this problem. And lastly, you don't sleep very well. You have, kind of tossing and turning sleep. Oftentimes you'll wake up really early in the morning, 3 or 4 in the morning. There's an interesting spiritual metaphysical reason for that, which we won't get into here today. But those are some of the symptoms of the conflict shock. So all of this to imply that the conflict shock, really, I translate it to an unexpected, difficult life event or situation. Weren't expecting it. You're not happy about it. This thing that's happened to you. That is the trigger, according to Dr. Hamer. So a couple more traits of this disease triggering event that are important to note is that it's very isolating. So in other words, nobody can help you, with your stolen bike or whatever, right? You can be angry about it till the cows come home, but your spouse can't help you, your friends can't, your mom, you know what I mean? No, what am I going to do for you, Matt? It's too bad, man. You get your bike stolen, right?
Right. I mean,
so it's
if
very
they could,
isolating.
Then it wouldn't be a conflict shock. If there was someone who would just help you, your dad just goes and gets the bike. Okay, well, that doesn't count.
Right. Oh, Tommy down the street stole it from you again. All right. Well, I'll go get it for you. Right. Then it's not isolating. So it's not a conflict shock. Right. You're going to get it back. The other idea here is that in addition to being isolating, it's also acute, meaning it's immediate. Some people tend to think that they've been dwelling on this thing in their life for years and years and years, and that led to their disease. Not according to Dr. Hamer. It's this acute triggering moment. Boom. It happens instantaneously. And the psyche makes a change in your brain. That's a brain relay. And it makes an alteration to it, which signals the organ or the tissue or the bone to make adjustments to try and help you. So some ideas would be like, if I thought you were a pain in my neck, Matt, I'm just saying it all the time, it's a pain in my neck. I might get a pain in my neck pretty soon, right? You're basically telling your psyche that your neck isn't sufficient and, that it needs to be strengthened. So this is what comes from the luxury group where it actually breaks down the neck. And we talked about this in our previous podcast in pretty good detail, right? The lumbar back region. I don't feel supported.
Yeah, chronic physical pain, episode 6.
There you go. So that's a good example to hear this is these figurative ideas that we have. Like, I don't feel supported. But what supports you? Well, it's your back. Specifically the lumbar region of your back is really provides the support, right? Kind of the shock absorber cushion of your back. So that's a good one to go listen to. We won't get into great details, but there's the stink conflict. This doesn't smell right. This stinks. I don't like this. Right? This is what tends to lead to what we call cold. And you find a situation is dangerous, or you're not sure about it, and you don't like what's going on. This is the kind of thing that leads to like nasal problems. But these are some ideas. And it's just important. I guess I got a reminder in here again that the disease causation is not about emotions or sins or psychosomatic disorders, as that phrase is commonly understood, because these really lack precision and accuracy, right? This is a result of a biological survival response. So this is your subconscious mind reacting to your conscious mind, trying to help you. And I guess we didn't point out in this, I've said it before, but I should point it out here, is that your subconscious mind, your psyche, is what runs your whole body. It's been doing it since day one, right? Breathes your breath, pumps your blood, beats your heart. It digests your food. It excretes your food. It kills the cells when they get old, and it generates new cells. It's doing the whole shebang for you at all times. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So why would we then somehow finger some other agent out there to be the cause of, a change in our tissue, right? Whatever it may be, a proliferation or a necrotization. Why wouldn't the psyche also be doing those things? It's a good question to ask. Okay. So yeah, it's a biological survival response.
Okay. So I think we've established at this point the conflict shock idea, and then we just kind of like touched on, yeah, there are certain conflicts, but we're going to get into them a bit more deeply later, right?
Yeah, maybe. We'll see where we go.
Maybe.
So let's get to this next area here, which is that a couple things about this psyche, autonomic nervous system, heart, Christ mind, subconscious mind, a lot of different words. Even you can look at a lot of old metaphysical texts, and they're choosing the word mind to mean way more than what we have come to term that word mind. Anyway, a couple things you got to understand about the psyche is that, number one, it doesn't register time as we know it. Everything is the now moment to the psyche. And you can look at a lot of different spiritual and metaphysical books and see that, a lot of them will tell you that, the only thing that's really true is here and now, the now moment, right? Eckhart Tolle, presence in the now. And so that's the way your psyche is registering things. It doesn't have a time tracker in it. The other thing about the psyche is it cannot distinguish between a figurative thought and a literal thought. To the psyche, every thought is literal. That's pretty shocking if you stop and think about it for a little bit. Because we have been very well brainwashed into thinking figuratively on a lot of different things. And if your psyche can't distinguish between that, you better be pretty careful thinking figuratively if it's of the negative sort, right, during unexpected life situation.
Right. So this is an important idea, right? So we covered first like these conflict shocks that are pretty like obvious, right? Like directly relatable from the physical translating to the body. But now you're introducing almost like a second tier of disease causation where it's created via some sort of metaphor that you're creating for reality. Right. So like some of these ones you've got here, I can't stomach that person. That is completely conveyed to the body via metaphor, that not like directly, right?
It's a figurative thought. So I can't stomach this. And I can't stomach this situation. That your psyche is taking this idea that there's a problem with your stomach. It's not good enough.
Right.
So,
and you don't even have to say, I can't stomach that. You don't have to think to yourself, I can't stomach it, right? But it's more like there's this situation in reality that you can't come to terms with or something. Like, I can't accept that, right?
Yep. That's
and
it. And that could also be
kind of like the the manifestation of that stuff, right?
Right. That's the, yeah, you could add, I can't digest this situation. So they both go together, right? The stomach, intestines, right? The gallbladder, the liver. And this is where anger registers.
Right.
So most of the anger conflicts are in the abdominal region.
Right. Yeah, and just watch your experience. Like just have a have a you know a new, more intense argument than you've ever had before with someone close to you, and just see if the next morning or even later that day you have stomach pain. And then go, oh, is that stomach pain caused by a germ? Or is it as predictable as I had a conflict shock argument last night and now I have stomach pain?
Yeah, I don't know that a brief argument would do it like that, but yeah, it's usually something you
Well, no,
carry
I
around
said
with you
one
for a
that's
while.
more intense than you're
Mm,
used to, right?
yeah, yeah, it's
Like a
possible.
new
Yeah.
level of argument, like that you're
Mm-hmm.
erupting over. It's like, can't believe this. Like, how could you?
That may not be too good for your relationship, though. Better be careful about that one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, but yeah, these are just some basic ideas. I feel unsupported. I talked about that one. I don't want to. I don't want to see or hear something. I've seen this one coming up a lot lately. A lot of eye problems and ear problems. This is actually that's
Mm-hmm.
an example of the 20% though, where the actual symptoms, the conflict active symptoms are seen in the conflict active phase. So that's what Dr. Hamer called the functional loss category. So the eyes and the ears are some things that happen in the eyes and the ears are related to that. Those are some
Right.
pretty complex organs.
So if you
Anyway,
don't want to see something or don't want to hear something, if you don't want to sense something in a particular way, your psyche will create physical changes to your body to make it so. And if it's you
right,
do want to hear something or you do want to be able to see something, it'll also make changes.
right. It'll be the left, right, or left. Right. It'll make changes to your eyes or ears, depending on whichever one. Right. If you don't want to see something, I really, really don't want to see something. Right. It'll make a change to your eyes, give you a problem with your eyes.
Yeah, like
Or if you
blurred vision or something, right?
right, or if
So
you
suddenly
really,
it's
really,
blurry or
really want to see
cataracts.
something, yeah, you really want to see something, but you can't. It'll also give you a physical result. I
Mm-hmm.
can't see this thing I want to see, so it'll actually fog up your eyes, so you literally can't see. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty intense. And there's a lot to the eyes and the ears. I just want to put that out there as one example. So
Mm-hmm.
what we got next here? So yeah, Dr. Hamer came up with a variety of different, very specific conflict themes. And I say specific, but then I talk to people and they say, that doesn't seem so specific to me, but it's actually incredibly specific. But everybody thinks subjectively in their own little special ways, right? So you can't literally say, well, yeah, you had a problem with your left pinky because you were angry at your third child. It's not
Right.
that specific. But some of the categories that he came up with were some big ones were separation conflicts, which are unavoidable in life, self-devaluation, self-esteem, self-worth conflicts, which I think is the biggest category of all. Again, that's judgment of self. Loss conflicts, like he had obviously with the death of his son. And then for men, there was a big category for men is what he called territorial anger, fear, loss, and marking conflicts. So men are kind of right; they have their territory, right? Their job and their car and their house, and they're the protector of it. And if anything right impinges in any of these areas, they can suffer some of these conflicts, and it can lead to some major diseases, to say the least. Women have more of what he called nesting and identity conflicts, which is an interesting category. But then there's the scare, fright, fear conflicts, which land in the lungs, the bronchi, the laryngeal, the throat, the esophagus. That's where those ones hit. And then we already mentioned the anger conflicts, which are really hit the abdominal region, is where those ones tend to hit. So, but he's very specific. If it's this disease, then it's this conflict, and it's related to mother child. He came up with this laterality thing, where if you're right-handed and the problem's on your left side, then it's related to your mother child, and if it's on your right side, then it's related to basically anybody else in the world. We call it the partner side, and then it's the reverse if you're left-handed. And ironically, I think about 20 to 30% of people who think they're right-handed are actually biologically left-handed. There's a few unique tests that you can do to see if you can prove that one out. So that can get a little bit complicated sometimes. But those are some of the big categories. He also figured out psychological diseases, which is astonishing. And he categorized this into what he called schizophrenic constellations. So depression, manic depressive, paranoia, nymphomania, just a huge variety of different things. And he figured out quite a few of these, that's a really complicated part of Germanisch Halkund. I won't get into any details today, but more or less, he has an explanation for every disease out there, more or less. Mm-hmm. So where does that lead me to? CT scans. This is where the science comes in. Dr. Hamer was one of the first people in the world to use the Siemens CT scanning equipment, or radiological equipment, back in the 70s, I believe. Maybe it was the late 60s. And Siemens is a German company, so he got to look at these things really early on, and was pretty fascinated with them. And he found after he made his discoveries in the 80s, he started to look and he started to notice these things he called target rings, little changes, little circles in the brain. And he pointed them out to Siemens. They told him they were artifacts, and he ended up taking them to court, suing them, and proving just by several different methods that they couldn't possibly be artifacts of the technology, that there were real things that were happening, in the tissue of the brain. And he actually won that case. But this has been deeply suppressed material. But in short, Dr. Hamer could be handed CT scan of somebody, and he didn't need to know much. I think whether you're male or female, or right or left-handed, and then after you told him it's as a left-handed female, he would then rattle off like all the diseases they'd ever had right now and would have in the future, just by looking at a CT scan. That's how scientific his findings were.
Right. And they can do that stuff with trees, So it's not so absurd. Like people go up to trees and they'll look at the rings and stuff, and they're like, oh, it had a very harsh winter in this year and stuff like that. Or you experienced this disease in this year. So he could do that with a brain, apparently.
Right. And there are some pretty amazing, things that were signed off on by physicians at universities, that they would bring this patient and he would go basically know their whole medical history and current problems just by looking at the CT scans. All 7 or 8 doctors would sign off like, yep, he's right about every one of these things. I don't think there's anyone else in the world that can do what he did. So that's one of the things that, we're struggling with now. I'm in an academy for Germanisch Halkund studying right now. And one of the things that's been promised to us is that one of Dr. Hamer's students will teach us how to read these CT scans. So we're all looking forward to that, but that's about a year off from right now. We're only about 8 months into a 2-year course, but we're looking forward to that. But it's one of the fallbacks that people always go to. Let's see. So anyway, but this is the irrefutable scientific evidence aspect of GHK, is that there are these CT scans. We don't need to look any further. And of course, you would think, even though people forget some of their conflict shocks, there's no doubt about it that most people can correlate and look back at this disease, and they can say, oh yeah, well, a couple months before that happened, or weeks or whatever, this happened to me, and you can start to make those connections. So it gets, you get to a point where you can't dismiss it so easily. And that's happened for me. I've looked at several hundred situations now, and some of them aren't clear, or I didn't get enough information or things like that. But for the most part, the diseases fit with the life situation and conflicts that people have had in their lives. So it's been interesting.
Mm-hmm. Right. Wouldn't you want to go into a doctor's office and present with some symptoms and then say, okay, we've got some statistics about these symptoms here. 93% of people who present with this symptom have this particular conflict going on in their life. Does that sound familiar to you? I mean, wouldn't you want that to happen?
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and yeah.
Why not? That seems so simple.
The claim is that Dr. Hamer compiled 20 or 30,000 case studies. I don't know. I've heard different reports and turned them into the, the German Medical Association, whatever that's called. And, I think he said he was at 95% accurate. on every disease under the sun, right? It wasn't just one type of disease. It was everything and anything. 95% accuracy. That's pretty astonishing considering we have 0% accuracy right now in our current system. Zero. But you can't prove anything. Zero proof of any cause. Anyway, let's keep it moving here. So the fourth biological law, I just wanted to hit this real quick. He had 5 biological laws. It's not important for today's to go over all those, but this was about bacteria, which is why our previous podcast, we did the bacteria thing, but he called them the microsurgeons of the body. They're at the scene of the crime. And it's all the bacteria show up following conflict resolution. So it's their role to either remove or restore temporarily altered tissue. So that's the bacteria story. Dr. Hamer called this conflict resolution the weight lifted off one's shoulders. That's the way he would reference it. So the individual will immediately notice moments later when something comes along that solves their issue. Right? This is what did it. My son changed his mind and decided to come back and help me take over the family business. Right? Boom, guys, instantly feels great. Right? The father. It just can happen that fast. Or well, it turns out your daughter is going to move back into town and she didn't want to stay, moving away. Boom, instantaneous. The sleep, the appetite, the warmth, immediate relief can be felt. So it's interesting that it kind of goes to that metaphysical aspect. Go ahead.
Even like you're calling these things immediate, but there's even more immediate things. Like you can notice literally your shoulders relax, or you can notice like a breath out, like, right? Or
right,
you can notice
it's
the breath. No, I was going to say one other one, but I forgot it. But you can notice things absolutely immediately and go, oh, a sneeze. You might sneeze. That's the immediate end of a conflict.
That's right. The big ones and the small ones. There's no difference in size to your psyche. They're all conflicts and different results can happen very quickly. But what I like to tell people is that one of the biggest reliefs there are is to understand the cause of the disease, right? That brings tremendous relief and unburdening. And it really gets you out of that FUD world, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? Like know this thing that happened to me just caused this to happen. My psyche reacted in this way. I'm not being punished. It's not karma. I'm not evil. I'm not sinning. But this is what my psyche did to try to help me.
Yep. Just a predictable, normal biological process. Be patient. Everything's gone back to normal. Don't get in its way.
There you go. So how do I wrap this all up? So, this is from both episodes here. So my tight explanation, simple explanation is that fear and judgment, which are the diseases of the mind, arising from unexpected, difficult life situations, are the cause of all disease. Fear includes worry, concern, scares, frights, grief, anxiety, stress, yearning, loss, separation, shame, guilt. Those are all fear, right? Those are all elements of fear. And judgment includes anger, self-deprecation, self-worth, self-blame, hatred, victimhood, vengeance, shame, guilt, pride, right? All these things fall into these categories. And I think I made a comment to you a couple of weeks ago that some of those might ring a bell with like the 7 deadly sins, right? Christianity. A lot of those fit into those categories. So we can see that there's some correlations. There's wisdom that's been around for a long, long time. So how do I want to finish this off? So just a kind of a challenge to disbelievers, deniers, and skeptics out there. So, I obviously don't expect anybody to just say, all right, well, yeah, you convinced me with this podcast. And now I believe everything that you said and you're totally right. This has got to be the right way. And I just want to, reiterate that I don't expect anybody to do that. I didn't do that when I heard this. I had to go spend months thinking about myself and other people's ailments and correlating things that Dr. Hamer had said and so on and so forth. So I just encourage people to file it in the, I'm not sure, filing cabinet. But I think it's important that people don't dismiss what's been said. Let's throw it in the mix. If we want to say, well, it could be the diet, it could be the 5G, it could be the genetics. Maybe it could also be what Dr. Hamer said. Let's at least put that in the mix of possibilities. I think that's what the conversation really needs to be these days. Let's not ignore what Dr. Hamer said, right? If it turns out he's wrong, and I don't know if he's right about everything, I think he's pretty right from what I've studied so far, and I've spent a lot of time looking at it. But I mean, I haven't worked with people with all of these different diseases, so maybe he isn't right. I don't know, but we're never going to know if everybody just ignores it, right? That's all. It's just going to be out there in the wind. What do I say here? So yeah, I just want to speak to the kind of this terrain crowd, right? With whether it's water, food, diet, living conditions, toxins, electricity, 5G, and I'm not, don't take me wrong. I'm not saying, hey, just go out and eat what you want and drink whatever the heck you want. It doesn't matter. Nothing can hurt. Nobody's saying that, right? We're not saying let's just, throw your diet out the window and become a slob that eats junk food and sugars and right. And just never does anything right. But I'm suggesting to those people, I'd like to see, viable, repeatable scientific study that's been attempted that correlates these things to particular diseases, right? I think you're guessing until you have that. And I'd also ask them to say, have you seen anybody attempt to produce a viable, repeatable scientific study that ever attempted all these things we've talked about, right? Where the state of mind of people and the diseases that they've had. I've never seen one before. It's almost like this, it's been deliberately dismissed, deliberately not looked at, the kind of the emotional mindset, see if there's any correlation between disease X and, train of thought Y, right? I don't think it exists. Could be wrong. And I know there's been subtle studies, but no one looking at some psychological situations, but nothing that really gets nearly as accurate as, what Dr. Hamer suggested. And I'd ask you, why do you suppose that is? Why do you suppose nobody's ever really made these types of attempts to correlate these things? It's a good question to ask. I've heard people say that there's no scientifically published proof of Dr. Hamer's findings. I think there is, but I don't think we can get our hands on it. I mean, what his results and findings are available to anybody for free. But, where I think some of the proofs that he has are in the hands of his widow now. And she's very, she lived the persecution. Dr. Hamer was basically thrown in prison twice and chased all through Europe and persecuted and had his life threatened several different times. So I think she's afraid to put anything out there from Dr. Hamer's findings. But I think there is some out there. To say there's no proof of what Dr. Hamer found is really somebody running away from it, because I think there is. He has provided some proofs. Now, whether or not they're true or not, that's another question. But I think there is some proof out there.
And the proof is readily available to your experience. Scientific proof is one thing, but literally all you need to prove that disease works in this way is just to monitor your own personal experience and watch how the thoughts in your head become symptoms. If you can just watch it the whole way, you'll go, check that out. Imagine that. And it's real.
Yeah. There is actual scientific proof, right? They're out on learningjnm.com. You can read what the symptoms are, what the conflict active phase is supposed to look like, healing phase A, healing phase B, epicrisis, and there's usually a CT scan that shows a brain scan with the target rings. There's quite a bit out there.
That, massive scientific description.
Right. To just say, well, that's not proof. No, we're all going to have to collectively work together to see if Dr. Hamer did indeed get things right, or maybe there's some things need some improvement or whatever. But the bottom line is this.
If I can just add to what you just said right there, like whether he's right or not, it's like he's presented a categorization of experience, but at the foundation of what he said is that these conflict shocks relate to your disease. And I mean, it's to me, having just watched my own experience enough, it's just like undeniable. Like if someone is denying it, it's because they're not watching their experience and watching how one thing leads to another. But once you start watching, it's just obvious.
Yeah. This is my closing remark. There is no other health modality that offers an explanation for anywhere near the number of diseases that Dr. Hamer did. Excuse me, got something in my throat. There's none other. So, if nothing else, we should be looking at Dr. Hamer's work and trying to disprove what he said with scientific, factual evidence. If we're not going to accept it as true, let's try to prove whether it's true or false, right?
Right.
That's the goal. The goal isn't to ignore it, which I'm afraid a lot of people are doing, just ignoring it. And I'm not going to even attempt to speculate on what those motives are, but it's being ignored. And I hope that
willfully
people change their mind. Willfully. Absolutely. Anyway, that's all I had, Matt. Anything else from you tonight?
No. I mean, it's great. It's really, really good description you put forward there.
Just bringing forth what a genius brought forth and a few geniuses ahead of me. I think it's all combined. Both of these episodes leads to some very obvious and logical conclusions that can be made. And I look forward to more people getting on board with this so that we will no longer have to be fearful and worried and scared about diseases. And when we get them, we know what's going on and we know how to resolve them. Nobody panics and people live longer, happier lives. That's the goal.
Well, I would say if us putting forward this information about disease has made you feel more empowered, like you're more equipped now to thrive in this world with this new view of disease, and it's like now you have less fear, right? And now you're not like, oh no, there's old germs everywhere trying to get me. You're just like empowered more. Then that would be an excellent sign that the further study we have to offer in Take Your Power Back is going to empower you even more. All right. So if you got a positive experience out of this, look at Take Your Power Back on our themindblowenzone.com and seriously consider that, because that's going to boost your general empowerment to your potential. It's going to take you all the way there.
Bingo. All right. Thanks, Matt, for joining with me here. And thanks everybody for listening, and look forward to a lot more interesting podcasts in the future along these lines. We're going to do many.
Okay. Thank you, Brett. And indeed, thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day.
Bye-bye, everybody.